He laughed at the old man's tattoos, thinking they were just decoration. He didn't know those inked lines weren't art. They were headstones. Each one carried a name, a death, a piece of a past he could never understand. And when the young seal asked that question, loud enough for the whole room to hear, the old veteran finally gave the answer no one was ready for. An answer that hit harder than any punch thrown in that gym. If stories like this remind you why real respect is earned, not demanded, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that stays with you long after it ends. The gym was alive with noise, weights clanking, boots shifting on rubber flooring, and the low hum of tired breathing after a brutal conditioning cycle. The younger seals were loud the way young men always were after surviving something hard, joking too much, flexing a little too obviously, trying to prove they belonged. And then Sergeant Cole Walker stepped inside. The atmosphere changed instantly, like someone dimmed an invisible switch. He wasn't the biggest man in the room, but he carried himself with an authority forged in places no one here had ever seen. His beard was gray, his shoulders broad, and his movements slow but deliberate. Yet what people noticed most were the tattoos, old, faded, carved into skin long before tattoos became trendy. They covered his arms in dense layers of ink. Names, coordinates, crude military symbols, foreign phrases, dates. Every line seemed to carry a weight the room wasn't prepared to understand. Most SEALs gave him quiet respect. Most except Raine Daniels. Daniels was 24, strong, fast, gifted, and just reckless enough to believe experience could be replaced with talent. He nudged a teammate and nodded toward Walker. "Man looks like a clearance sale sticker book," he whispered. A few guys chuckled, softly, nervously. Walker didn't react. He loaded plates onto a barbell with the patience of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Daniels watched him for a moment, and instead of backing off like everyone hoped, he stepped closer. "Hey, old man," Daniels said with a carefree grin. "Why so many tattoos? You get bored in retirement or something?" The gym froze. The sound of metal stopped midair as someone lowered a dumbbell too carefully. Two guys muttered under their breath, "Bad idea." And, "Not him, dude." Daniels didn't understand. Not yet. Walker didn't turn around. He didn't flinch. He rested his hands on the bar, lifted it onto his shoulders, and performed a slow, perfect squat. When he re-racked the weight, he finally spoke. "You really want to know why?" Daniels shrugged, suddenly less confident. "Yeah, sure." Walker straightened, wiped his palms on his shorts, and answered with a calmness that cut sharper than anger. "Each tattoo is a man." Daniels blinked. "A man?" Walker nodded once. "A man who didn't come home." The room felt different now. Quieter, heavier, like oxygen itself hesitated before touching his words. "I carry them," Walker continued, "because they carried me. Every line on this arm is a name I had to write down before the world tried to forget it." He tapped one part of his forearm. "This one was my spotter in '03. He bled out on my boots." His finger slid to another mark. "This one, our corpsman. He patched us up until his hands stopped working." Then Walker pressed his fist to the tattoo on his chest. "And this one, the man who took the round meant for me." Nobody moved. The weights, the laughter, every sign of youth and ego, melted into a silence so tight it almost hurt. Walker finally turned his head toward Daniels, his eyes steady, direct, and unbearably honest. "So tell me, son, how many tattoos do you have?" Daniels swallowed. His voice came out thin. "None." Walker nodded slowly, not with pride or superiority, but with the quiet pain of someone who'd lost more than most people ever would. "Then maybe one day," he said, "you'll understand why I have more than I want and fewer than I should." There was no judgment in his voice, just truth, raw, old, and earned the hard way. Daniels stood frozen, feeling something he'd never felt before. Not embarrassment, not anger, but respect so heavy it almost pushed him backward. No punch could have hit harder than that answer. And the room knew it. The gym stayed quiet long after Walker finished speaking. the kind of silence that didn't just fill a room but pressed against it. The younger SEALs went still, their faces frozen somewhere between shock and shame, as if they had just witnessed something sacred and weren't sure whether to apologize or salute. Daniels stood there, eyes locked on the old man, searching for something to say and coming up empty. Confidence was easy when lifting weights or cracking jokes, but this was different. This was a reminder that strength wasn't measured in muscle or speed. It was measured in what you carried and what you survived. Walker didn't wait for a response. He walked past Daniels with a calm, steady stride, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if he hadn't just gutted the entire room with a single truth. He grabbed a towel, wiped sweat from his hands, and headed toward the far corner of the gym where the older equipment sat. The kind younger guys avoided because the metal felt colder and the weight somehow heavier. Daniels watched him go, feeling something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't fear. It was the sudden realization that the man he'd mocked wasn't just older. He was operating on a level Daniels hadn't even known existed. Chief Maddox, one of the senior instructors, walked up behind Daniels and spoke low. "Son, you have any idea who you're talking to?" Daniels shook his head. He didn't. Maddox exhaled and folded his arms. "That man has done more for this country than most of us could ever dream of. Half the operators you idolize learned from him. The missions you see in documentaries? Some of those only happened because he made it back." Daniels felt his throat tighten. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Maddox replied. "And that's the difference between a good operator and a great one." Across the room, Walker slid plates onto the old squat rack like a man performing a ritual he'd repeated since long before any of them were born. Each movement was deliberate, practiced, almost reverent. The younger SEALs watched him differently now, less like a relic and more like a monument. Daniels stayed rooted to the floor, trapped in a storm of thoughts he'd never had to face. He'd grown up believing respect was optional, something people earned only after proving themselves in front of him. But Walker had proven something without raising his voice or throwing a punch. He had shown what it meant to carry weight that didn't come from iron. Daniels finally forced his feet to move. He approached Walker cautiously, like a man walking toward a cliff he wasn't sure how to cross. Walker didn't look up. He was adjusting the bar, aligning it perfectly before his next lift. Daniels swallowed hard. "Sergeant Walker, I didn't mean." Walker cut him off gently, not with anger but with quiet understanding. "You didn't know what you were looking at," he said. "Most don't." Daniels nodded, feeling the words settle deep. "I'm sorry." Walker gave a small nod, not forgiveness, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. "Being sorry isn't the hard part," he said. "Changing is." The bar lifted cleanly off the rack as Walker stepped back into position. Daniels watched the old veteran descend into a perfect squat, steady as a foundation, breathing controlled, posture unbroken. There was no shake in his legs, no hesitation, just a man who had spent his life under pressure far heavier than steel. A few SEALs exchanged glances, each of them feeling something long overdue: humility. When Walker finished, he racked the weight and turned to Daniels again. "If you want to know about the tattoos," he said, "learn to earn one first. Not with ink, but with responsibility." Daniels stood speechless. Walker grabbed his water bottle, took a slow drink, and then added, "You train hard. That's good. But don't confuse strength with depth. Depth is what keeps you standing when everything else falls apart." The words landed with quiet precision. For the first time since joining the teams, Daniels understood he wasn't just learning how to fight. He was learning how to become a man capable of carrying others. And the realization hit him harder than any impact bag, any instructor's yell, or any blow he'd taken in combat training. He looked at Walker differently now, not as an old man, but as the standard. And standards were meant to be lived up to. Daniels couldn't focus on the rest of his workout. His muscles moved out of habit, but his mind was stuck replaying everything Walker had said, word for word, tone for tone. It felt like someone had taken a flashlight and shined it straight into all the blind corners of his ego. Every rep felt heavier, not because of the weight, but because he finally understood how little he actually knew. Across the gym, Walker worked in silence, moving through a routine so controlled it almost looked like meditation disguised as physical training. He lifted, paused, breathed, and lowered the weight with a precision that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with discipline carved over decades. Every movement whispered experience, and every scar beneath the tattoos hinted at something even deeper. Daniels watched him for a while, torn between curiosity and caution. He wanted to ask more questions, but the earlier moment still sat like a stone in his stomach. He wasn't sure if he had the right to ask anything at all. Eventually, Daniels grabbed a towel and headed toward the water station, where two older SEALs, Briggs and Morales, stood whispering. They weren't gossiping, they were remembering. Daniels caught the tone before he caught the words. It was the sound of men talking about someone who mattered. Back in '09, Briggs said quietly. He pulled 3 Rangers off a mountainside in Cunner, by himself, under fire. Morales shook his head. I heard about that. Helicopter took rounds. Rotors almost sheared off, but he still brought them home. Daniels pretended he wasn't listening, but Briggs noticed him hovering nearby. Instead of shooing him away, Briggs motioned him closer. You want to know about the ink? Briggs asked. Daniels swallowed. Yeah. Morales crossed his arms. Then start with this, those aren't tattoos. Not to him. They're records. Daniels frowned. Records. Names, Briggs said. Dates. Grid coordinates. Some of those marks, they're not just for the dead. They're for the fights he shouldn't have survived. Morales nodded. The man's been in more firefights than half this base combined. Some operations weren't even confirmed for years. Some still aren't. But every time someone didn't make it, he added a mark. Not to show off. To remember. Daniels felt his chest tighten again, a sensation he was becoming uncomfortably familiar with. Briggs continued. When Walker retired from his active combat role, he didn't want a ceremony, didn't want a medal, didn't want a speech. He walked off the tarmac with nothing but the clothes on his back and the tattoos on his skin. Morales finished the thought. Because the men he lost deserved more than a folded flag and a plaque. Daniels ran a hand through his hair, feeling smaller with each passing second. Why does he still train with us? Guys that young? Briggs exchanged a look with Morales, then said, because someone has to remind you all what happens when the noise stops. When you're not fast enough. When you're not smart enough. When you think strength is something you can measure on a barbell. Morales added, he trains because you need him more than he needs you. Daniels stood there, processing every word. He had joined the SEALs thinking he understood toughness, but now he felt like he'd only been looking at the surface, at muscles, bravado, and speed. Walker represented something else entirely. The part of the job that required you to confront grief, guilt, and responsibility without flinching. The weight behind the ink wasn't just pain. It was duty. And Daniels realized he wasn't just embarrassed by his earlier comment. He was ashamed. Ashamed that he had laughed at something he didn't understand. Ashamed that he had judged a man whose life had been spent carrying others. He looked toward Walker again. The old veteran was putting weights away, cleaning the bar, organizing the rack with the kind of methodical care that seemed unnecessary but somehow perfectly fitting. Nothing Walker did was sloppy. Nothing was careless. Everything had purpose. Daniels took a breath, squared his shoulders, and made a decision. He wasn't going to let ignorance define him. He wasn't going to be the kid who made the joke and learned nothing from it. He was going to learn. From the ink. From the man. From everything Walker represented. And as he stepped toward the veteran once more, he felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not intimidation, but a quiet resolve. The first spark of the maturity he didn't know he was missing. He was ready to listen, even if the truth hurt. Daniels approached Walker slowly, as if nearing a wild animal he didn't want to startle. The gym had thinned out. Most operators sensed something unfolding and gave the 2 men space without acknowledging it. They pretended to stretch, rack weights, check their phones, quietly orbiting around the moment without interfering. Walker wiped down the bar with a towel, calm as ever. He didn't look up when Daniels stopped beside him. Sergeant Walker, Daniels said, voice careful. Can I ask you something? Walker placed the bar back on the rack with a soft clank. You can ask, he replied. But the answer might not be easy. Daniels nodded, accepting the terms. Why didn't you correct me earlier? When I made the joke, you could have shut me down right away. Walker finally met his eyes, and the look wasn't harsh. It was tired, the kind of tired that came from decades of watching young men make the same mistakes. Because snapping at you wouldn't teach you anything, he said. Embarrassing you wouldn't make you grow. And yelling at you? That only works on people who fear noise. Daniels frowned slightly. So what works on me? Walker gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Truth. Truth lands where pride can't defend itself. Those words hit Daniels harder than he expected. He nodded once, more to himself than to Walker. The veteran continued wiping the equipment, speaking in that steady voice that made everything sound like quiet instruction. You're fast, he said. Strong. Smart when you want to be. But all that means nothing if you can't see beyond your own reflection. The teams aren't built on biceps and confidence. They're built on men who understand what they're responsible for. And you think I don't? Daniels asked softly. Walker didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned toward the far wall of the gym, where a faded memorial plaque hung with dozens of engraved names. Do you know any of them? Daniels swallowed. No, sir. I do, Walker said. All of them. Every last one. He turned back to Daniels with a gravity that settled deep in the younger SEAL's chest. You want to act like you're invincible, that's normal at your age. But the day will come when you have to choose between your own life and someone else's. And that decision, that's what puts ink on skin. Daniels stared at the plaque, the weight of service suddenly feeling more real than any briefing or training lecture he'd ever sat through. Did you regret it? He asked quietly. Any of it? Walker shook his head. No. Regret belongs to the ones who never tried. But grief, that stays. You just learn to carry it without letting it crush you. Daniels felt something shift inside his chest, an uncomfortable tightening mixed with understanding. Is that why you still train with us? Because of them? Walker looked away for a moment, then nodded. Partly, but also because I'm still here. And being here means I'm not allowed to quit. Not while I can still teach men like you what the classroom never touched. Daniels didn't know what to say. His throat was tight, and for once in his life, words didn't come easily. He wasn't used to feeling this kind of heaviness, the kind that forced you to reevaluate everything you thought you understood about yourself. Walker took one more sip from his water bottle, set it down, and continued. You're not a bad kid, Daniels. You're just young. Youth mistakes arrogance for confidence, confuses volume for strength. But those things fade fast the first time the world hits back for real. A long silence followed, not awkward, just full. Finally, Daniels found his voice. Can you teach me? He asked. Walker raised an eyebrow. Teach you what? How to carry things, Daniels said, gesturing vaguely at Walker's arms, the tattoos, the weight behind them. How to be the kind of man who doesn't break when things get ugly. Walker studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his sincerity. Daniels held his gaze without flinching. That's not something you learn in an hour, Walker said. Or a week. Or a deployment. I know, Daniels said. But I want to start. Walker nodded slowly. Good. Then listen carefully. Your strength isn't tested in the gym. It's tested the moment you have to decide whether someone else's life matters more than your pride. When you can make that choice without hesitation, then you'll start understanding what these tattoos really mean. Daniels exhaled, and the breath felt like it carried a version of himself he didn't need anymore. Then I'll learn, he said simply. Walker gave a single approving nod. Then we begin tomorrow. 0500. Don't be late. Daniels almost smiled. Not from pride, but from purpose, real purpose for the first time. Walker turned back to the weights, but his voice carried across the small space. And Daniels, bring humility. That's the heaviest thing you'll lift. Daniels showed up the next morning at 4:50. Not because he feared being late, but because something inside him had shifted. The track looked different in the pale dawn light, almost like a boundary between who he used to be and who he was trying to become. He expected Walker to be waiting outside the gym like before, standing still with that rigid posture that made time feel slow. But this time, Walker wasn't there. Daniels felt a flicker of panic. Had Walker changed the time? Was he supposed to meet somewhere else? Was this part of the lesson? He scanned the area until he saw the old veteran sitting alone on a bench near the memorial wall, elbows on his knees, head slightly down, not in defeat, but in reflection. Daniels approached quietly, unsure whether to speak. Walker looked up before he got close. "You're early," Walker said. "Good." Daniels nodded. "What's the lesson today?" Walker didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to the spot beside him. "Sit." Daniels wasn't used to sitting before a workout. Felt wrong, but he obeyed. The bench was cold, the air crisp, and the memorial wall behind them carried names etched into metal that glinted faintly as the sun began to rise. Walker didn't look at Daniels. He stared ahead, voice steady but lower than usual. "You asked me yesterday why I still train with young men like you. Why I don't disappear into retirement like everyone else." Daniels swallowed, waiting. Walker lifted his left arm and traced a faded line of ink near his elbow. "This one," he said quietly, "was the first." Daniels leaned forward slightly, but didn't speak. Walker continued, "It was 1991. Desert Storm. My first deployment. First real firefight. First time the world stopped feeling like a map and started feeling like something that could eat you alive." His fingers paused on the tattoo as if the ink itself carried warmth. The man's name was Harrison Fletcher. He was 21. Older than you were when you joined, younger than you are now. Daniels felt the heaviness of the moment settling between them. Walker exhaled slowly. "He died 20 minutes before we were supposed to rotate out of the sector. 20 minutes. We were almost home. And the worst part wasn't the chaos or the shooting. It was the look on his face when he realized he wasn't going to make it." Daniels listened without blinking. "He grabbed my vest," Walker said softly, "pulled me down, told me to tell his mother he tried his best. That's what he cared about. Not medals, not glory, not the mission objective. He wanted someone to tell his mother he didn't quit." Walker fell silent for a long moment. "When we got back, the rest of the team moved on. They had to. That's how it works. You bury the body, you write the report, you compress the grief into something you can carry. But I couldn't stop seeing his face. Couldn't stop hearing his voice." Daniels finally spoke. "So you tattooed his name?" Walker nodded. "Not because I wanted to remember him. I could never forget him. The tattoo wasn't for memory. It was responsibility." He tapped the ink. "Every time I looked at it, I asked myself if I was living in a way that honored what he died for." Daniels felt something tighten deep in his chest. Walker continued, "You see strength in the ink. Most people do. But every tattoo feels like a failure to me. Not because I failed them, but because I couldn't save them." He paused, voice steady but thick with decades of weight. "A good operator accepts that death is part of the job. A great operator never stops questioning if he could have done more." Daniels didn't know what to say. His own struggles felt embarrassingly small compared to the story he was hearing. Walker turned his head and looked at him directly. "That's lesson 2. Daniels frowned. "Lesson 2. Walker nodded. "You asked me how to carry things. This is how. You don't hide from the past. You face it, you learn from it, and you make damn sure you don't waste the sacrifices of the men who trusted you." Daniels felt the truth sink into him like an anchor finding the ocean floor. Walker stood slowly, joints stiff but strong. "Come on," he said. "We run now. Not for speed. Not for strength. For Harrison Fletcher," Daniels said quietly. Walker looked at him for a moment, then nodded once, just once, but it meant everything. They began running together, footsteps sinking naturally, the sun rising behind them as if honoring the name etched in ink. Daniels didn't run for himself this time. He ran for someone he had never met but suddenly felt connected to. And with every stride, He understood why Walker's tattoos weren't decoration. They were vows. And Daniels realized he wanted, someday, to earn a vow of his own. Daniels didn't know why his stomach felt so tight the next morning. Maybe it was because Walker's voice from the day before kept replaying in his head. This one doesn't belong to a soldier. It belongs to a boy. Every tattoo had carried a story so far, but something about this one, this final one, felt different, heavier, as if it carried the weight behind all the others. Walker didn't wait at the gym or by the track. Instead, he stood near the edge of the base, where the forest line touched the fence. The sky was barely waking, a thin gray veil spreading across the horizon. Daniels approached and stopped beside him, unsure whether to speak first. Walker broke the silence. "Walk with me." They followed a narrow dirt path through the trees. No words, just footsteps, pine needles, and the steady rhythm of a man who had walked through hell so many times he didn't need a trail. After a few minutes, the old veteran stopped at a fallen log and sat down slowly, wincing only slightly, the kind of quiet hurt that came from years of impacts and injuries. Daniels took a seat beside him. Walker exhaled long and slow. "The tattoo on my back," he began, "isn't military. No dates, no coordinates, just a single line, a small, simple line." He paused. "To most people, it looks like nothing." Daniels listened intently. Walker continued, "It's the height marker of my younger brother, 8 years old. We used to mark his height on the kitchen doorframe every birthday." A faint, sad smile crossed his face. He was wild, curious, braver than he should have been for his age. Every time he'd grow another inch, he'd sprint through the house like he'd just won a medal. Daniels didn't interrupt. "One day, he found my old BB gun and tried to climb the fence by the creek. Slipped, fell, hit his head on a rock." Walker swallowed hard. "I was supposed to be watching him." The silence was no longer between them. It wrapped around them. "He died before we got to the hospital," Walker said softly. 8 years old. And no combat patch, no mission, no training day ever hit me as hard as losing him did. Because that was the first time I learned something the military spends years trying to teach you. The weight of responsibility. And the consequences of failing it. Daniels felt his throat tighten. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Walker said gently. "None of you do. People look at these tattoos and think they were born from war. But the truth is, the first weight I ever carried wasn't on a battlefield. It was in the back seat of a car, holding my brother's hand and begging him to stay awake." Walker looked upward through the trees, as if searching for something he'd lost decades ago. "That line on my back is his last height," Walker said. "The last mark he ever earned. I tattooed it there so I'd never forget why I fight. Not for medals. Not for glory. Not for revenge." He paused. "For people who can't fight for themselves." Daniels sat silently, the words soaking into him like water into dry earth. Walker continued, "Every man I protected, every mission I survived, every decision I made when things went bad, all of it traces back to that moment. Responsibility isn't about orders. It's about choosing who you refuse to fail." Walker stood, joints creaking but spirit steady. "That's why I trained you. Not to make you faster or stronger, but to make you aware. Aware of what the people around you count on you for. And aware of what you owe them." Daniels rose as well. "For the rest of your life," Walker said, "you'll carry weight, some of it earned, some of it given, and some of it thrown at you when you least expect it. But you don't run from it. You don't break under it. You carry it. Because someone has to." Daniels felt the truth in his bones. Walker reached out, placed a firm hand on Daniels' shoulder, and said, "You asked me how to become a man who doesn't break. This is the answer. Let the weight shape you, not destroy you. And when the day comes when someone depends on you more than you depend on yourself, be ready." Daniels nodded slowly, deeply, fully understanding for the first time. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. Walker gave a rare, small smile. "Good. Then we're done here." But Daniels shook his head. "No, we're not." Walker raised an eyebrow. "I'm not done learning," Daniels said. And I'm not done earning the right to stand beside men like the ones in your tattoos. He paused. I don't ever want to be the guy who only trains for himself. Walker stared at him for a long, silent moment, then nodded once, a gesture that carried more respect than words ever could. They walked back toward the base together, not as an old man and a young operator, but as mentor and student, as past and future, as two men connected not by age or rank, but by the weight they were both learning to carry. For the first time, Daniels understood why Walker's tattoos hit harder than any punch. Because the stories behind them were heavier than any man could lift alone. And now he wasn't lifting alone anymore. In the end, Daniels understood what the rest of the base had learned long before him. Sergeant Cole Walker was not defined by age, rank, muscle, or even the ink that wrapped his skin. He was defined by the weight he carried and the quiet strength with which he carried it. Every tattoo wasn't a decoration but a vow, a promise to remember the men who couldn't come home, the lessons carved into loss, and the moments that shaped him long before he ever stepped onto a battlefield. Daniels also learned something far more important than how to fight, run, or spar. He learned that becoming a warrior wasn't about toughness. It was about responsibility. It was about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before, protecting the ones who stand beside you, and choosing to be someone others can depend on even when the world is falling apart. Walker didn't just teach him to be stronger. He taught him to be accountable, aware, and unbreakable in the ways that mattered most. And somewhere between the early morning runs, the quiet lessons beneath the trees, and the stories inked onto skin like living memorials, Daniels found what every young operator eventually searches for: purpose. Real purpose. The kind that doesn't fade when the workout ends or the mission is over. The kind that sits quietly on your shoulder and asks, who are you carrying today? If the story of Walker and Daniels moved you, reminded you of someone you honor, or made you think about the weight we all carry, then don't let it end here. Like the video to support stories that matter. Share it with someone who understands loyalty, sacrifice, and quiet strength. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that honors the men and women who stand watch when the rest of the world sleeps. Some stories entertain, but stories like this, they remind us who we are and who we should be.